Petrick and Adrian Gonzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
Compadre.
Yeah, it's
my new check. That's my new. It's my new catchphrase.
We're doing catchphrases now. Is that the new thing? Is that the new hotness?
You know, good was my catchphrase, but now that is my catchphrase. I hope you all support me in this transition.
I don't, but
right, fair.
So I feel like I should address this on the main show. I did talk about it briefly in the pre-show for the patrons. But I quit my job. I'm going back to school. Episodes should be a little bit more cheery. I'm feeling good about things. I'm optimistic about the future. But with that said, we should take care of upkeep here. We need to, take care of stuff around the house before we really delve into our conversation topics for the day. And I want to talk to you about Original Magic Art. They are a part of the sponsorship of this show. They create all sorts of really neat magic accoutrement, paraphernalia, whatever word you choose to use for it. They make dice bags, they make playmats, they make tokens. They sell art prints of magic art. They have tokens with classic art from, the rest of life. They've got all sorts of cool pieces on tokens. They make really great products. Josh is a really stand-up guy. They, not that long ago, had a Kickstarter for their Relics of Wizardry program, these cool metal stamped tokens and counters. They're really neat. You should definitely check them out. And if you do, and you decide to purchase something from them, I highly advise you to use the code Commontary, all caps, spells as is in the name of this podcast. You'll get 5% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. So you're helping the show out, and you're getting a nice little discount on neat little accessories to make your Magic play experience a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. What do you have for us today, Adrian?
Well, as you all know, we have a Patreon. For just as little as $1 an episode, you too can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, as well as getting access to our Patreon exclusive Discord.
Yeah, and the Discord's been real good. Got a lot of people congratulating me on big life changes, so that feels good. And it's always nice to meet the people who actually like the content that we make. And also, we definitely talk about the show there and get ideas from it. So joining is always helpful. All right, Adrian, do you want to take a little moment to talk about the field report that we got from friend of the show, Nick?
Marine Bro himself. Yes, I will take a moment to talk about that. So Nick Marine Bro, unlike me, went to GP Houston, and he decided, and thank you, Nick, to send in a report of the Grand Prix. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm not gonna read it verbatim. I am gonna hit the highlights. He says 2 people he spoke to flew in for Pauper. The main event. One of them was from Dallas, which is neat. And then the other one came all the way from DC to play Pauper in Texas, which is crazy to me and also awesome. And I think really speaks to how the format is doing. So, and for those of you who have not yet been to a GP, here's how it worked. At least for stateside Channel Fireball people. You were able to queue for a event they call Turbo Pauper, which is just one round versus an opponent. So it sounds like you'll be able to get a lot done very quickly. And he says that there were over 100 players partaking in this kind of side event. So pretty exciting. And his metagame breakdown, as it is 3 burn decks, 2 mono black decks, 2 Izzet Delver or Skred Delver decks, 2 Goblin decks, 2 Tron decks, doesn't specify which kind, 1 black-white Oromancer deck, I think that's the Pestilence deck, 1 copy of Elves, 1 copy of Izzet Blitz running Jesson Thief, which is kind of interesting, 1 copy of Buggles, 1 copy of the Puzzle Control deck, 1 copy of Boros Monarch, and 1 copy of Deemer Control, and even, and this is for the brewers out there, 1 copy of the Whirlpool Mill deck. The player he met was the person who normally runs this online and said that he was ranked first in the Pauper League as of GP Houston. So he was he did great, basically, is what Nick told me. So he went through. I guess there were rounds in this event too. I guess maybe there was a main event and a turbo event. So he went 3 rounds. He played against Mono Black, Skred Delver, and Boros Monarch. go 3-0. Okay, sorry, I should have read this a little bit better. Those are the decks that won out. He did hear people talk about how there are issues on Moto. He heard people talk about how expensive Oubliette and Ash Barons were. He saw a lot of trades at the GP with people bringing up the fact that Pauper was a major selling point. That the cards that they're trading are Pauper playable. And really the big one is that he said that he played this My Color Commentary playmat and he got a lot of recognition. So thank you. If you were at GP Houston, you played against Nick, I hope you had a good time. I'm glad he was able to report back to us.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear like a firsthand account, and thank you, Nick, for sending this in, because it really does help us get an idea of what it's like on the ground. Like, obviously, we have people like the professor who are going out and proselytizing on behalf of the format, but he's obviously not giving these super intense breakdowns because he is there to do other things. He's not just there to play Pauper. So it's nice to hear sort of a run-of-the-mill experience with these type of events. It's really, really helpful, and thanks again for sending that in, Nick. I'm glad to see that there is a greater recognition of the format in the Magic community in general. It's definitely like a good sign of interest in the format. It's we're growing, and I'm excited for the future. It's gonna be beautiful. All right. So our first discussion topic for the day, now that we've gotten our pre-show stuff, our mail from friends of the show, you have been testing for GP, and I believe it's Kyoto. Is that correct?
Correct. And I actually spent all day with Nick today testing for that GP, so that's kind of funny.
All right. So you're testing for the GP, and you're not playing Pauper. You're actually playing Legacy.
Correct.
But
it is a team constructed event, so I am the Legacy seat in our team.
Yeah, and the reason I brought this up on the show and not just in the pre-show is last week we talked a lot about brewing, and we really placed a heavy emphasis on testing. And I kind of wanted to talk to you fresh off a very long testing session and get like just sort of immediate feedback on your testing experience today and what you think worked well about it, what you think didn't work well about it, and how those can be applied to someone who's playing Pauper or really any format in Magic. And I think I'm going to kind of leave the floor to you to kind of talk about this, and I can ask questions if there's anything I think we could learn a little bit more from. So go ahead and tell us like what you did process-wise and what you think worked well, what you think didn't work well.
Well, Mike, I think that even before the actual testing began, we set this expectation that this was going to take a long time. Like, we spent several hours doing this, and so we planned accordingly. I actually made brunch over well. We didn't have to like leave and get food or anything, so people could just like eat real fast and like be focused on the testing. So I think setting the right environment for testing was very key. And this is actually the first thing that I think I could have done a little bit better. Is I don't really have a good for a group of people. Like, I can do 1v1s pretty well, but my table really support two people on either side. So I ended up being like an elongated table, but two people were playing a normal match and the two people were sort of playing over them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So making sure that your space can actually accommodate all the people who are showing up for the testing.
Right, and we made it work. And this is a big group test, mind you. You might just test against one other person, but that was a negative on me. But the other thing is that, and I had not seen this before. My teammate mentioned that he was going to be proxying up a gauntlet, and I expected him to individually proxy up each of these decks. Much to my surprise, and obviously this makes so much sense when I say it. I'm sure that you at home may have heard of it. Cards. And you print out the list like 10 or however many decks in your gauntlet. So let's say there's 5 decks. A little like card with like you have Mountain, Plains, Bolt, or whatever, and then you associate a number with them, and then the number is the deck that they belong to. And so with just one deck, you can easily play 6 or 7 decks if you know all the cards in the format or all the cards in the decks you're playing with. And I just never seen that before, and I thought it was a really cool way of saving on space.
Yeah, I've definitely seen this used for testing gauntlet style things, because it doesn't require you to A, own all the decks, B, it doesn't require you to proxy up 20 different decks for a format. It just lets you kind of quickly and easily test stuff and have a good idea. As long as you know what the cards do, it will make sort of this gauntlet style testing a little bit easier on you, just in terms of getting all the resources together. So that is a super good tip.
I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah. So the actual testing, what was kind of the process there, and what do you think was helpful? What do you think could have been improved?
We played. I was playing against Burn, and we played game 1 like 10 times. And I guess that's the point, is that you always you get a pretty good idea of how the games are gonna go. So we just jammed game 1 over and over and over again. And my partner would keep track of who won, who lost, who went first, were we pre-sideboard or post-sideboard or not. So it was a pretty interesting way of keeping all that data. And we have some statisticians on our team, so we're going to be able to crunch those numbers really effectively and get a pretty good picture based on just our internal testing of what the matchup against a given deck might look like for not only the deck, but also for the pilot deck pairing. And we talked a little bit about that on the last show too.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all really good. And let's say someone doesn't have access to, statisticians, because obviously like that is very useful for a game like Magic. Just kind of like
kidding.
Keeping track of all this data, I think, is really good. I guess obviously I don't know exactly how you guys are tracking all this data, but is there sort of a very sort of simplistic 3,000-foot view thing you could say are like the important things? Like you mentioned who's on the play, who, whether it's pre or post sideboard. Are there any other notes that you guys are taking? Like, are you taking notes on how you're sideboarding?
Taking notes on how you sideboard is definitely extremely important. And that way you can sort of evaluate, like, were these cards useful or were they not? And so I thought bringing in Pyroclasm might be correct, because sweep some of the little creatures that might give me trouble in the later game. It turns out that was wrong. Every game where I resolved a Pyroclasm and even was able to 2-for-1 my opponent, he still would win the game. And so we decided that was not a good sideboard plan.
Well, that's really useful, because that way you can, track these things and go, well, this might be good in this matchup, but then you can actually see the data and say, okay, well, this seemed like a good idea because they've got a lot of 2-toughness creatures, but in the end, it's not bearing out increased end results.
Exactly.
Okay, so
good.
So once you tested against Burn, did you manage to get in testing against other decks and kind of sort of feel out other matchups?
We actually spent quite a while on the Burn matchup, both pre and post board. So I did not get as much time as I would have liked to play against other decks. After that, we played 2 Doomsday matches, which I don't really think is pertinent. Wanted to try it out. I don't think he played the deck yet before.
Okay.
But it basically came down to, like, game 1, I just like absolutely stomped him because I was able to, like, he did nothing and I show and telled. And then game 2, I lost because I didn't do anything. I drew like 6 lands and he was able to like cast Doomsday. So.
Okay. So being able to sort of sit back and look at these different matchups and talk about, like were there discussions back and forth about this as you guys were playing these, or did you wait until after you'd played a couple of matches to actually sit down and have a discussion? Like, how much back and forth was there?
We talked as we went.
Okay. And actually worth asking here, did you guys talk during games? Like, was there ever a moment where like you got to a decision that was really difficult and you just kind of stopped and, hands on the table and tried to figure out how to play this situation out? Or was it all played as it would be in an actual tournament?
We would what correct lines were, but we didn't actually play with our hands face up. But we would say, this or this might get me out of the situation. We would definitely talk through like our thought process, even if we weren't actually talking about what was Even if we're playing with our hands face down is what I'm trying to get at here. Sorry, I'm struggling to say that, but it was still good feedback because we were being a little bit open with each other about what exactly we were trying to accomplish,
Yeah,
or what we thought like our lines out were.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's really useful when you're playtesting a specific deck, is being able to kind of be frank about that and just go like, okay, I think this is my only out here, and this is the line, and the other player can say like, I don't actually think that matters, or they can say, yep, no, that's gonna work. And so I guess, how much more confident do you feel after how long did you guys spend testing again?
Maybe 2 or 3 hours. I mean, we need to do more. We're doing this every Saturday until the GP, which is in like a month and a half. It's actually really soon.
Oh wow, yeah, that is creeping up on you. But so after those 3 hours of just like intense sitting down playing pretty much one matchup over and over again, how much more confident do you feel with the deck, and how much more confident do you feel in that particular matchup?
I feel way more confident with the deck. I'm playing, I don't know if I've said it, I'm playing Sneak and Show. And so there are a lot of lines where you can kind of screw yourself, even if your opponent isn't in an interactive deck. And this is the perfect, like, Burn is just a non-interactive deck. I'm trying to combo as quickly as possible. I don't care what they're doing. I just need to find my combo pieces and kill them. And there was a turn where, and it didn't matter this game, but I had like Show and Tell in my hand and like Omniscience, exact line, but I basically ended up blowing the Omniscience to Force of Will something, and then I don't know, my opponent ended up conceding, but I don't think I could have won the game actually. So it helped me think through like, the most effective way of deploying resources, even in a non-interactive game where I'm not really concerned with what the other person is doing, just so I can make sure I'm playing correctly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good sort of progression of thought. So I guess, obviously we're talking about legacy here for, the fact that you've actually been testing this. How would you say this stuff sort of applies just one-to-one in the abstract to Pauper, just like the concepts of like talking about the matchups, testing pre-board and post-board games, taking all these notes, making sure that you're recording as much data as possible? Like, is this just one-to-one, or are there any adjustments you would make if, say, in the future there was a Pauper GP and you were testing for that?
No, I think this is one of the most effective ways to test. I would highly recommend that you use some sort of standardized testing method, even if it's Pauper.
All right. I think that's really good. Just kind of wanted to bring this up because you've been really excited to test for this, and obviously you've got this big event coming up. You guys are flying across a huge ocean to get there. So I think this was a good time to bring it up, just because we did talk about brewing and having some actual real world testing experience under your belt in the recent history. I just think it's a good idea to bring up and, kind of reinforce what we talked about last episode. I guess, do you have anything else to say about this before we move on to our other topic for the day?
A lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to just hang out with your friends and play Magic, especially when on the table you're all just trying to like teach each other the best. And it really helps people be critical. If your friend is doing things that you don't think they should be doing, I think it's much easier to say, hey, I don't think you should have done that. I think you should have done this, and then like have a discussion about it. So I think that keeping it honest is also very important. I know we talked about that as well, but I think it's invaluable, and getting to know your teammates if you're on some sort of team event is also very good. And then even if you're planning on playing an event solo, having that support group behind you, I think, is one of the most important tools you can have.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So let's move into our second topic for the day. And this is one that we've been getting, frankly, a kind of shockingly high amount of requests for. A couple of people asked us to talk about the differences between the MTGO card pool and the paper card pool. Now, so I just want to give kind of, the intro to this, the preamble. So when it comes to paper, cards that have been printed at common in paper and cards that have been printed in common online, there is a discrepancy between the two of them. There are, I did a search on Scryfall, just quickly threw together something. There are a total of 424 cards which are commons and have never seen print online. They've or have not been released as a common online.
Kind of a lot.
Yeah, it was actually much more than I expected. And so this chunk of cards encompasses everything from before Mirage that hasn't seen a reprint online at common, and also supplementary sets such as Conspiracy 1 and Conspiracy 2, which have up until recently been missing a lot of cards. They're missing less cards, but there are still cards from them missing. So that's sort of the scope of what we're looking at today. And worth noting is when some of the Conspiracy 2 cards, notably Entourage of Trest, I forget what else we got in that batch. We recently got a batch of cards ported to Magic Online that we didn't have access to before, that were in Conspiracy, and we also got access to a couple of these older cards, notably Flood. Metamorphosis was in the batch. Enervate or Energy Tap, sorry, the other one that does that thing. But we started to see we started to get a little bit closer to these pools being 1-to-1, and I think today what we want to talk about is kind of the notable cards, because a lot of these cards, Adrian, would you believe me that a lot of these cards are not actually good?
I would absolutely believe you, because I've seen most of them. A lot of the cards just matter. There are some, of course, like Felden's Cane.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really good.
Yeah. So I'm looking here.
By and large, or Desert.
Yeah. So looking here, just on the first page of results for this, there's a card here, Abbey Matron, which is a 1/3 for 3 mana that you can pay 1 and a white and tap it, and a creature gets and it gets +0/+3 until end of turn. So we're not talking about like cream of the crop cards by and large, but I think what we want to talk about today is sort of the big ones that would actually have some level of impact in the format were they brought to Magic Online. And the first chunk of cards that I want to talk about are ones that I feel are problematic to bring into the format. And these are ones that often are added to ban lists for paper popper events that use a larger card pool. And we're going to start things off high with a Goblin Grenade. This is 1 red for a sorcery. Sacrifice a goblin as an additional cost to cast it, and it deals 5 damage to a creature or player. Adrian, what do you think about this card?
I actually think it's okay, to be honest with you.
Okay. Do you want to kind of explain where you're coming from on that?
High potential for burst damage, but Pauper is mostly a format about like Spellstutter Sprite. I mean, not mostly, but like that's a card in the format. Hydroblast is a card in the format, which is just a 2-for-1. And Goblins isn't really that strong.
Okay, so despite the fact that this is like the most effective rate on a burn spell that can hit a player or a creature, you think just the fact that you can potentially be 2-for-1 off this is enough to kind of relegate it to not being a problem?
Sorcery, so I mean, it's got that huge downside. I mean, sacrificing the creature is not a downside really, but like it could be, I guess, if your opponent like kill all your creatures on. So I just like don't really think Goblin Grenade would be a big deal, honestly. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, that's my opinion about it.
All right, okay, so let's go to the next one, because I think we can both agree that this is a problem. This is Hymn to Torok. Hymn to Torok is black for a sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards from their hand at random.
Hymn to Torok is the one that I will always say is bad for the format. And I explain myself by saying Wizards doesn't always ban cards just because they're too powerful, which Hymn is powerful, but is Hymn like game-breakingly powerful? Probably not. Like people wouldn't like it, but people would suck it up and move on. But Wizards also has a history of banning things because they're not fun to play against, and Hymn is very unfun to play against. The format is not as powerful as Legacy, where Hymn is still pretty unfun to play against, but at least you have the option of maybe doing Force of Will, or maybe and the card power is just so much higher. So it's a little bit different. But I just think that Hymn is never like to see in the format.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those cards where like the worst case scenario is you lose 2 cards that didn't affect the game right now. Or sorry, the worst case scenario for your opponent. The best case scenario for you is you lose 2 cards that aren't like a factor in the game at the moment. The worst case scenario, like if your opponent turn 2s this and they're on the play and they hit 2 lands out of your hand that you really needed to, you know, continue to advance the game, you can just not play Magic that game. It's a super high variance card and it's just not very fun to play against. I've actually pulled it out of my Peasant cube because it just creates a really bad taste in players' mouths because it doesn't feel fair. It's not a skill taxing card and it's not super difficult to cast. So I think this is one that even if they did sync up the pools, I would not like to see in the format.
Correct.
Do you want to take the next one?
This one is Merchant Scroll. I have not cast a lot of Merchant Scrolls. I know what it does, but let me get the exact text for you. It says search your library for a blue instant or interrupt, but it means an instant. Remove that card all players put in your hand after. So basically you get to tutor a blue instant to your hand. Okay, so I also don't think this card is that much of an issue. Going to Merchant Scroll for, I guess, Gush, because that's what you would do in other more powerful formats like Vintage. But Merchant Scrolling for Gush and Vintage is way different than Merchant Scrolling for Gush and Pauper. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less powerful here, but it still does represent like a 2 mana tutor. It's nothing to sneeze at, in my opinion. Like, it is a very effective way to get a specific answer to your hand. Yes, sorcery speed, but I still think that this is one of those cards that, you know, we've got Mystical Teachings, which arguably gets a wider variety of well, not arguably, it does get a wider variety of cards, but costs twice as much, and that was at one point like a very, very powerful card within the format to the point where it was archetype defining. So I think that Merchant Scroll, I don't think would break the format wide open, but it's also one that I would want to see under very close scrutiny if it ever came to Magic Online, for the sheer reason of it is a very, very powerful card to be able to cast. And next up on this list is a card that I think should never come to Pauper. We're talking about Desert. It's a colorless land, so it taps for colorless, and it has the subtype Desert. Neat. But more importantly, it has the ability tap, deal 1 damage to a creature that attacked this turn, play this ability only after combat damage has been dealt. This thing is real dumb. A couple of these can lock down a game very quickly, and they don't. I don't know. Like, Adrian, do you have a counter argument for this? Like, is there a good reason that Desert should be allowed in our format?
No, I don't think so. I think it would immediately go into Tron, which can tutor for it relatively easily, doesn't care that it creates colorless mana, and is able to really leverage in order to gun down creatures. So I don't think it's basically a spell. It's a land that also taps for mana, which is just like the recipe for disaster. So I think it would be pretty bad for the format.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Speaking of lands, we also have Sinkhole on this list. Black, sorcery, destroy target land. Now, is this actually enough to make like land destruction a thing within Pauper?
It would give black 4 extra copies of. I think it has Rain of Tears a common. Maybe not.
I don't think Rain of Tears is, but we've got Icequake and Choking Sands at the 3 mana slot.
Rain of Tears is not. Where am I going with this? I don't know if Sinkhole land destruction actually good. That deck's not very good right now, but I also don't think Sinkhole is that good. I used to feel very differently about this. I used to think it was just like, oh my god, Sinkhole, if that was in the format, no one would play anything. But you know, Choking Sands and the other one aren't that strong either. And with land destruction, I guess the extra mana does matter, but I just don't like this would only go in like one very specific deck. And even then, I don't know if it's strong enough for us to say like mono black control to run it over what it's already doing. Sure.
I don't know. It strikes me as one of those things where, since pauper decks generally tend to lean a little bit light on the land side, I could see this. I don't know. Maybe this will force people to actually play a reasonable land count in their deck. But I think that it again. I think it's similar to Hymn to Torok in that it can create very one-sided games where only one person actually gets to play Magic, and I think that generally I prefer to lean away from that style of game experience. So I would not be super upset about this, but I would not be a big fan of it either. All right. So next section that we have is cards of note that I think are probably okay. And I actually want to talk about a weird one first. Because this is actually on the Card Kingdom Rags to Riches ban list because it used to be very busted. High Tide. I don't think this card is good anymore, is it?
I mean, what are you doing with all the blue mana? Exactly. Like, in your Delver deck, do you care about being able to? No, it just doesn't make any sense. Maybe in the Familiars deck, you could do something busted with it, but since Drake is no longer in the format, I also really struggle to think about what damage it could do. I guess a particularly potent combo, just what would you do with it, is you could Merchant Scroll for High Tide if both of those cards were legal. But again, what would you do with all that mana? There's not like the 8/8 Eldrazi Annihilator creature. Like, you're not storming off or anything.
Yeah, and even with that, like, you'd have to have 5 lands in play, so you're basically just cheating 3 mana for an extra card. I don't know. Yeah, that's it's really, really dodgy to me. Like, this is one that I originally had in like the problem card section, but like I just don't think there's anything left that enables it to be sort of a degenerate card. And I'm sure someone has like an answer for this where it's like, oh no, there's a combo. But at first glance, I can't really see any reason for this to be a problem. And if it's not a problem, then I think I'm okay with it living in the format.
Me too.
Next up, the red and blue elemental blasts, and this is one that comes up fairly frequently when this discussion topic is broached. What do you think about letting people run copies 5 through 8 of Pyro and Hydroblast?
I just don't think it matters. I don't think people are going to dedicate 8 sideboard slots to these cards. And seeing as it doesn't matter, I would prefer them just to release more Hydroblasts and Pyroblasts on Moto in order to feed that demand.
Yeah,
Pyro and Hydroblasts are like technically better, like in very like corner cases, but I just don't think that red and blue blasts are actually good enough. Like, I just don't think we would care if they were in the format.
Yeah, I could see it becoming relevant if like a deck has a very, very bad matchup against either red or blue, and someone wants to really, really shore their sideboard up with like a 5th copy of one of these powerful effects. But I can't imagine that like you're ever going to go much over 5, maybe 6 in the very worst of case scenarios. So I don't know. This doesn't seem to be a big issue. Do you want to talk about a couple of 2-for-1 removal spells here?
Sure. Up next, we have Forked Bolt, which lets you do 2 damage for R sorcery as you choose between. It's kind of like Electrolyze, because you don't draw a card, but it doesn't cost more. You get to do a damage to 2 creatures, or a damage to an opponent, a creature, or any way, shape, or form. There. This was printed in a dual deck, Speed versus Cunning.
Was it Speed versus Cunning? I thought it was Eldrazi versus Zendikar, or whatever it was.
From Zendikar, I don't. Let me look it up. Very important.
Oh yeah, this is.
I think it's originally from Zendikar. Yeah, it's powerful. I think it'd be very strong. I think Tron would want to play it. Boris would want to play it. I think it is a very, very good card, and I think it would see play. Maybe not as a 4 of, but certainly as a 1 or a 2 of in certain decks. There are some good X1s to kill in the format. Most notable is probably Standard Bearer. but it can also deal with an opponent's crypt rats before they have, if they have to like slam it on turn 3 for some reason, or it can deal with Flayer Husk tokens. It can deal with a lot of creatures, or you can deal with frogmites. Like there's a lot of 2 power and 1 power creatures that you might want to get rid of.
Now let me toss this out there. Twin Bolt does exist in our format. It's one generic mana more, but it is also an instant. Like I really think that Fork Bolt probably doesn't even see that much play if it does show up in the format on MTGO. And even if I just can't see this affecting the format that negatively. And I can see it being a nice little versatile removal spell / burn spell.
Yeah, I think it's a strong card.
All right, what's the other 2-for-1 that we've got here?
Ashes to Ashes, which is the black version. Dust. And it is a From the Dark special. Drew Tiger special, so you know it's good. You exit the sorcery, black 1, exile 2 target artifact creatures, Ashes to Ashes deals 5 damage to you. So very significant downside.
Yeah, it's not exactly a cheap thing to cast, but like this is just a 2-for-1 on its face. Like there's nothing subtle about it. It just kills 2 things that aren't artifacts dead for a very, very efficient rate. Like this is basically like I guess you're swapping 5 damage for 1 mana and a card over having a pair of, I guess, Go for the Throats. But and I guess it does exile as well. But I just really like this card because it's you're doming yourself for 5, but it does give you a way to answer 2 threats very quickly. So I think the drawback on this is enough that it comes with a real cost and it's not going to be overly abused.
Yeah, and it again really only goes like very specific decks. The only place I've ever seen it is when we had a local player play Teachings at Pat's, and even then it was only like a 1 of in the deck, you know. So it's a very, very niche card.
Yeah, I think this is something that could come into the format and would be powerful, but not game breakingly so.
Not oppressive.
Yeah. Now I want to go a little bit further into our show notes here and talk about the like assorted other cards from the early days of Magic that just haven't made it to Pauper on MTGO. So I've got Ashnod's Altar here. This is a kind of commander all-star. It's 3 generic mana for an artifact, and you can sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless to your mana pool. I think this is probably fine. Is there an infinite combo I'm missing here?
There might be. I have to assume the card is good. Plays it. The first thought you might think is Tron, you know, stupid amounts of colorless mana, but that deck already makes stupid amounts of colorless mana, and it doesn't really have the creatures to sacrifice to this. Maybe you could see it played in a sacrifice theme deck, like a black-green sacrifice theme deck. But then what do you do with the colorless mana? A, and B, it doesn't really contribute to your board. In order to really make this work, like you said, you need to have some sort of infinite combo where like somehow killing the creatures to net more mana to cast something like either makes more creatures or like does damage so that you're able to keep feeding the altar and create a recurring loop where you usually win the game. And I just don't think that kind of effect exists in Pauper. I guess if you had Sprout Swarm in your Tron deck, you could make a stupidly large by that I mean Rolling Thunder or something like that. But yeah, like you said, I'm not really sure. Like the card is good, but I don't know if it'd be game breaking because I don't know what would really be able to abuse this effect.
Yeah, like the best case scenario I'm coming up with for this is in a deck that really wants to turbo out a Gurmag Angler. I guess this count, like you can pop a creature for 3 mana towards your Angler, but even that like isn't exactly worth investing a card in my mind. Next up we've got a funky little one, Darkness, which is black for an instant, prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn. This is just fog in black. This was printed as a common in its original printing. I think this is fine. It's a color pie break, like all get out, but I don't see black having access to a fog as being the end of the world, I guess.
It is a sweet card. Definitely go into the mono black sideboards. That's where I can see it. Would also be powerful in the teachings deck. I think this card would definitely see play as a sideboard card simply because of its utility in a color that doesn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny that it would be a good card. I just don't see it being, format warping, I guess. Next
I don't
up,
either.
next up, we've got a funky little number from Portal 3 Kingdoms, False Defeat. This is 3 and a white. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a sorcery. This is a weird card that doesn't really exist in Pauper. It is a reanimation spell, but it's also 4 mana and in white. Can you think of a good use for this?
I think we would 100% see play. White, like you said, very odd choice. Not the only card that does this. There's also Resurrection and Breath of Life, both of which are also white cards that do the same thing, basically. Are not common, I don't think. So that's why we don't see them. But yeah, it would be very interesting to see maybe like a black-white reanimator deck. But the blue is so important, and the red is, you have access to this one cool spell. You have access to this one cool spell, but it's in the wrong color.
Yeah.
So it would be the only other reanimation spell in the format, right? The other one is Exhume. So like that in and of itself makes me think that people would want to play with it, but weird color. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally on the money. Like it just doesn't fit into an existing deck, but someone would probably build around it, and it would be interesting to see what it does. And at 4 mana, it's not reanimate, so it's not going to create problematic board states where someone is winning on turn 2. It's going to create weird board states on turn 4 where someone reanimates something out of the bin. All right, next up we've got Mystic Remora. Now this is a doozy. This is a Ice Age special. It is 1 blue for an enchantment. It has cumulative upkeep 1, and whenever another player plays a non-creature spell, draw a card unless that spell's controller pays 4 generic mana. I think we talked about a card similar to this, Rhystic Study, a couple weeks ago. Does Mystic Remora do anything more for you than Rhystic Study did?
Mystic Remora costs 1 less, which is strong. But it's like in Vintage is good because you can make your opponent have to pay for like their moxes and stuff, which is kind of neat. So in Pauper, I'm not sure it's as good. Interesting effect. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, all I can think about is like Rhystic Study is already hard enough to like get positive value out of this. There are some decks that don't play that many non-creature spells. Like, what do you do in those matchups?
I don't
know. Next up is a neat little card that I do want to talk about because this is a rarity restricted cube staple. Pyrotechnics, 4 and a red for a. I believe it's an instant. I need to check. Sorry, we're being super unprofessional tonight.
It's a sorcery.
Oh, it's a sorcery? All right, wonderful. So it's a sorcery, and it deals 4 damage divided as you choose between any number of target creatures or players. This is a neat little thing. It's kind of a Rolling Thunder for 4 that costs 1 red less.
Do you not think this would see play?
What was that?
Because like you said, I said I don't think this would see play. Thunder, and I don't think the payoff for 5 mana is really that great.
No, that is totally fair. I did just want to bring it up because it is very popular in limited formats. It's a very good card in those, so it is something to think about. I could kind of see this being played in a Tron list that has less access to specific colored mana, and would perhaps like the fact that it is just red and 4. But it's not a perfect solution. I'm actually going to skip ahead a couple too, because I included some less than great examples in here. Sunken City. Are you familiar with this little hidden gem?
I actually am, because I used to think back when I first started, it seemed really powerful and therefore it must be valuable. But no, it is awful and not valuable. So I was very disappointed by Sunken City. The effect, however, is sweet, and I definitely think this would see play in decks like Mono Blue Delver. Definitely not a turn 2 play by any means, but if you're on a locked board state and suddenly your Delver's a 4/3, just think about it. This is a strong card.
I don't know if we actually said what it does, but it's blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay blue, and blue creatures get +1/+1. I will point out this is a symmetrical effect. I don't know if you've noticed that.
No, I still think it's sweet.
Yeah, I this is one that seems like it could get out of hand very quickly in a Delver deck, just because like turning your Spellstutter sprites into 2-mana 2/2 flyers that also counter stuff seems very good, and we don't really have persistent Anthem effects. And yes, it does have an upkeep cost, but this is a very solid effect for a deck that's kind of playing a tempo game already. Being able to up your clock means that you don't have to always have it for quite as long.
It's sweet. I think it would definitely see play. Maybe not. Maybe you're right. Maybe main board is too risky, but definitely as a sideboard card, because I can just imagine like against some decks, this must just win you the game if you resolve it.
Yeah, totally. Next up is a sideboard card that I actually would love to see in Pauper, because I think it actually presents some really interesting options, and it's Tormod's Crypt. Tormod's Crypt is an artifact for 0, and it has one ability on it. Tap, sacrifice Tormod's Crypt, exile target player's graveyard. That's all there is on the card, and I actually really like this as a piece of sideboard hate. And I guess my question is, do you think that Tormod's Crypt would see play in Pauper?
Yes, I think a free artifact is good. I think the fact that this graveyard hate is good. Would it be as popular as it's the same sort of deal as modern, right? Like the cards that you want to play, like this card is legal in modern alongside cards like Nile Spellbomb or Relic of Prejudice, and also cards like Rest in Peace, which if you're not playing white, obviously your mileage will vary. But I really think it depends on what kind of decks you're expecting to play in that format. There are some where one is better than the other. So I think the same sort of thing would apply here to Pauper, where there are some decks that would be much better for you to have basically the Nihil Spellbomb effect without drawing the card and being free. And then there are some that you would prefer to slowly work on their graveyard over the course of the game. So I really think it just depends. I would like to see it because it is a pretty sweet tool. It stand alongside the other two, and I think just have its own situations where it would be the best choice.
Yeah, I do particularly like the one-sidedness of it, because it does allow you to play it in a graveyard-based deck. And again, like the fact that it's free is ironically not nothing. Next up, we have Unstable Mutation, which recently actually got reprinted in a way as a color-shifted version of this card showed up in Amonkhet. So Unstable Mutation is blue for an aura, and enchanted creature gets +3/+3, which is great. It's a permanent-ish giant growth. It does have the downside of during your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on the enchanted creature. I could see this potentially showing up in, I guess Blitz doesn't want it, but it does just turn something in a blue deck into an incredibly efficient clock that, while it gets smaller every turn, like if you kill your opponent before it dies, you don't really care. I guess what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's not very good, to be honest with you. Played in real life, and I don't think it's ever been really that meaningful. But I'm a little surprised it's not legal on Moto, because I do see that it has been time shifted. Is the time shifted rarity not considered to be the original rarity? Is that its own unique rarity?
It sure is. That's the same reason that Desert actually isn't legal for the format, because Desert was also time shifted.
Okay.
Time shifted counts as its own rarity.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
You've got one last one in here that you included under the assorted others. Do you want to talk to us about this little artifact?
Yes, the card is called Felden's Cane. It was a common in Chronicles. Also a time shifted special. It's a 1 mana artifact. You exile Felden's Cane to shuffle your graveyard into your library. So theoretically, you could use it in like a deck, a very slow deck, like Teachings was the case people cited it might be most useful in, where you could just really grind out your opponent, and then when you were getting low on cards, you could just shuffle your library, your graveyard back into your library, and then keep going with business as usual.
Yeah, that seems very good. I seem to remember hearing stories about at some point when Elixir of Immortality was legal, that there was a control deck that ran it. Am I misremembering or hallucinating or something here?
I think that was a thing. I feel like that was in the today. I feel like that was in the time when I was playing Standard, the Ravnica Innistrad Standard, and I think the blue white Sphinx's Rev deck used to play this card.
Okay, yeah, that tracks with me, like from a conceptual standpoint, but I don't think with Teachings kind of in the position within the metagame that it is, where it's kind of, more of a fringe deck these days rather than sort of the bastion of control that it once was. I think that this would probably be fine. I guess I could also see it as like tech if a mill deck gets really out of control, but I don't see that ever happening. So I guess I'm fine with this, right? I don't know.
It seems fine. Also, I was right about Elixir of Immortality.
I do love me an Elixir of Immortality. It's a fun card. And lastly, there's the little sliver of modern Magic that we've never gotten online. And I'm talking about Conspiracy 1 and Conspiracy 2 Electric Boogaloo. Conspiracy 1 features 2 cards that I thought were worth bringing up. The first is Dream Fracture, which is actually a reprint from somewhere in Lore 1 block. I don't remember exactly. But it's 1 blue for an instant. Counter target spell, its controller draws a card, and then you draw a card. So this is similar to Arcane Denial. What are your thoughts on this?
Really sweet. Sure, it's symmetrical, but you get to draw a card, and then they draw a card, and so like you said, it reminds me of Arcane Denial, and so it would be good in Turbo Fog as just another permission spell that forces them to have more cards in their hand, and then also if you have Jace's Erasure out, it mills them for 1, and it replaces itself in your deck. So I think it would be a very niche card, but I think it is an interesting and powerful card.
Yeah. Also, it's got this weird art of like, I don't know, an egg with the universe in it.
So creation is a paradox.
All right. The other one from the original Conspiracy that I want to talk about is Marchesa's Emissary, which is 3 and a blue for a human rogue 2/2. It's got hexproof. It also has Dethrone, which for those who've never seen this ability before, whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is a weird card. You can't really remove it efficiently without an edict, but it also gets bigger if you're winning the game. If you control it, if your opponent's leading the life race, it does get bigger. So it's interesting for that. I don't know if this is actually good though.
I don't think it's good, but it is interesting.
All right. And just to round things out, in Conspiracy 2, we had 2 more cards with the Monarch ability on them. And those cards in question are Canal Courier and Crown Hunter Hireling.
A really hard time talking today.
Yeah, we're just like a very, very bad mouth mess. So Crown Hunter Hireling is 4 and a red for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, but it can't attack unless the defending player is the Monarch. This is just trash, right?
Yeah, so that's awful because when you're the Monarch, you want to stay the Monarch.
Yeah, it's also 5 mana in red, which I don't know any red deck that actually wants to get to 5 mana before its opponent is dead. So I don't know, not very good. And Canal Courier actually has a attack trigger which doesn't really matter. So it's 5 and a blue for a 3/5. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. Whenever it and another creature attack different players, it can't be blocked this combat. So it actually is just a 3/5. You become the Monarch for 6 mana. This is miserable as well, isn't it?
Yes, don't play that card.
You can't. Like, Wizards is actually helping you here by not printing this at common on MTGO.
If it became legal, don't play that card. Sorry, I should have specified.
It's okay. It's been a big old day. It's a little later than we usually record, but yeah, don't play Canal Courier. It's just bad. Okay, so that's taken us through most of this, and I guess to close this out, Adrian, what are your feelings on like them trying to create a unified Pauper format if Pauper sustains the popularity that it's had recently and there becomes a demand for this as a paper format? Like, do you think it's a good idea for them to press forward and just make sure that the pools are unified, or do you think, you know, it's unnecessary for these cards to actually be included in the Pauper format?
I'd rather the pool be unified, all of these cards be in the pool, and then we figure it out from there. And if it turns out it sucks, we look at bannings. Give the naysayers a fair shake in the format. You know, Hidden the Torok is one of those ones where people get a little ridiculous about it for whatever reason. I don't know why that card in particular out of all of them, but people get really up in arms about it. But I think if there was a unified list, the unfortunate effects, I think people would go back to really harping on the C3 and the U2 commons for not really being in the format. People, I think, are always going to find bone to pick with the format because it's a moto format. But I think a big step would be unifying them and then sort of helping us get on the right track. And then you can say, well, Wizard says that this is what the format is ubiquitously, so there's no more guessing.
Yeah, I think just eliminating that like issue. And for example, like, it was tricky for me to figure out the exact query for Scryfall, and it turns out what I had to do was just say commons that aren't legal in Pauper. And that's like a really weird thing because Pauper's whole thing is it's only commons. But the catch is there's like 400 cards that just aren't legal in the format because they've never seen a MTGO printing. And I think being able to say just there is one card pool, there is one ban list, we're done, would be great. I understand it's not Wizards' top priority, but should they choose to in the future sort of lend more support to Pauper as a paper format, I think it would be really, really great if they could do this just to kind of put it to bed and hopefully never have this discussion topic need to come up again, and we can just move on from there.
Amen.
All right, so with that, I think we've pretty much covered all we can about this. I'm not going to get into that C3 U2 debate at all because I think it's silly. But unless you've got anything else for the evening, Adrian, I think we're done here, and you can take us out of the show.
I think I'll take us out of the show. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This podcast is brought to the support of viewers like you, and also especially our patrons. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check for this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. I'd also like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, you can absolutely feel free to email us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to Mike's LGS, JP Comics, and the ever musically talented L. You can find our theme song, Quantitative, and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. I'm Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.